Bonjour, Mishko Pakanan Kwena Dishnakas Mangdodam. Hi everybody, my name is Sandy Boucher, Red Thunderbolt Woman of the Loon Clan, and I'm a proud member of Seine River First Nation in Northern Ontario, and I'm here today to welcome you to the path away from lateral violence. I am so absolutely thrilled that you have chosen to go on this journey with me. Now, every single module has a different agenda. Today's module, I'm going to introduce myself to you, and not just my name, and give you an idea of my work and why this is so important to me and why I am qualified to present this information to you. Then we're going to look at the definition of lateral violence, and I'm not talking about the definition you're going to find in your personnel policies. I'll touch on that later, but this is really super important just to give you the context, the background, the base, the foundation for the rest of this course. And then right at the end, I'm going to touch on why lateral violence is such an issue in Indigenous communities. There is a valid, justifiable reason for it. And we're going to look at that. And it's not just that your coworker or your neighbor is a creepy dude or a creepy lady. That's not it. There is a reason. So let's jump right into it. First and foremost, me. I work full-time as a motivational speaker. This is what I do for a living. My vision, my mission is to empower marginalized men and women so they can live their lives to the fullest. As mentioned, I'm Anishinaabe. I am Ojibwe, an Indigenous woman, and I have seen what violence in many forms, including lateral violence, has done to my personal life journey, to my family, to my parents' life, and to my children and grandchildren. This is personal to me. Now, before I became a motivational speaker, I've always kind of been a cheerleader and literally was one in high school. Don't even picture that, please. Just don't. I first started in employment and training. I went to work in one of those amazing Indigenous organizations that you can find throughout the country, helping our men and women go back to school, find a job, or even start their own business. I started as a secretary, and slowly, one step at a time, I worked myself up the ladder. It took 20 years. But by the time I stopped to look around, I was now executive director of a $4.2 million agency in downtown Toronto. I had worked at this for 20 years and I had the statistics. And they broke my heart because after 20 years of funding training programs, I wasn't seeing a difference. It's not like there was a whole bunch of our people in our communities now trained, now employed, now financially stable, or even better than that. Something was missing. Some of our people still weren't taking training at all. They didn't believe they could do it. Some were getting really good at taking training, but not taking it anywhere else. I just wasn't seeing the difference. And what I realized was lateral violence was playing a huge part of this, along with internalized oppression. I swear those are like first cousins, and they go hand in hand. Our people either didn't truly believe they could be successful, that they could know a life away from drugs and alcohol and violence and poverty, or they didn't know what that would look like, and they didn't believe they would be comfortable in a successful world. So they either didn't try or they self-sabotaged. I realized I needed to make a difference, that I could make a difference because of my own personal life story. You see, I was raised by a beautiful Anishinaabe from Seine River First Nation. My bloodline, my family line is Couchiching First Nation in Northern Ontario. And my mom showed all the classic signs of internalized oppression. She was funny. She was outgoing. She was intelligent at home. But as soon as we left the yard, she grew silent. She tried to blend into the background. She knew that her presence offended some people. And she had me for a daughter. I'm certain I'm responsible for every gray hair she had. But I also had my dad, who happened to be French Canadian. My dad was a white male. He didn't have the barriers that my mom saw as barriers that you just could not get past. And he saw me. He saw my straight A's. He believed and told me on a regular basis that I'd be prime minister one day if I decided that's what I wanted to do. Thankfully, I had my dad in the house, because way too many Indigenous men and women are raised in a home where both parents are saying, don't try that. Do you really think you want to do that? Are you sure? That's going to be dangerous. They're never going to let you succeed. And our children start believing it. But I had my dad, and he believed in me, and I ran with it. Now I use my success story and years and years and years of training and research to empower the men and women in our communities, men and women like you. I help you to understand what you see in our communities, in our families, and even on the 6 o'clock news. I help you to understand it so that we can move away from judgment towards success, because that's what we all deserve. So now that you know who I am and why this is so important to me, let's talk about this whole idea of lateral violence. First and foremost, if you go look at your personnel policies, I'd be willing to bet if there's a policy that references lateral violence, they're going to say that there's 3 different types of lateral violence. Harassment is one of them. Discrimination is the second, and bullying is the third. Now, those are very specific legal definitions, but we know that it's way more personal than that. What I'm talking about is the lateral violence that we experience in our families, in our homes, in our communities, and yes, even in our office places. So I came up with a definition, and this is mine and mine alone, and you can feel free to argue it. In fact, in the homework, you're going to get a chance to rate your own, so if you don't like it, you get to change it. That's empowering. I have it written on the screen just behind my camera here, so if you see me looking off in the distance, I'm not ignoring you. I just want to make sure I get the exact wording right, so when we put the text on the screen, I won't confuse you. So here is my definition of lateral violence. Passive or aggressive words or actions delivered by someone you know, love, or trust, intended to discourage you from advancing. Let's try that again. Passive or aggressive words or actions delivered by someone you know, love, or trust, intended to discourage you from advancing. Now that's a big, long definition, so let's look at the parts. I mentioned that the words or actions could be passive. Well, when I decided to go to college and I was going to be the first one in my family to do that, my mom, out of sheer love and concern, simply said, "You sure you want to do that?" Believe it or not, that's lateral violence in its passive form. It had me stop in my tracks, and suddenly I went from excited to going away to college to, is this something I really want to do? Is this a lot scarier than I think? Mom's nervous. My mom's the bravest woman in the world. Why would she be nervous? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. To see how it almost held me back? That's lateral violence. Or it's aggressive. Being told you can't do that. You're never going to be allowed to do that. Why do you think you have the ability? Why do you think they're going to hire you? Why would anyone read your book? Sadly, I've heard them all. Why lateral violence is so devastating is because those words or actions are delivered by someone you know, someone you love, or someone you trust. This is not the unknown troll on the internet making a comment. That's not lateral violence. Lateral violence is someone right next to you at the same level, your partner, your parents, your elder in your community, because we've all been trained in lateral violence. As Indigenous people, we have a master's in lateral violence. So we shouldn't be surprised when we run into it. That doesn't mean it's right. It has to be changed. That's the reason we're doing this course. But it is most definitely common. And the greatest indicator or the hint that you should recognize this is lateral violence is that it's intended to discourage you from advancing. So someone trying to talk you out of bidding for that new job, going away to college, trying that diet, going to that new restaurant that you've never been to before and it's an upscale restaurant and they're trying to say you don't belong there. Do you see how this is very limiting? Lateral violence is incredibly discouraging, and that's why it's so important we educate ourselves on it and overcome it. What you have to keep in mind, the closer the relationship, the more impact the lateral violence is going to have. If it's an aunt that you haven't seen in ages who says something, sure, it might catch you off guard, but you're going to dismiss that a lot more than the man or woman you love saying, why do you think they're going to hire you? Do you see what I mean? It is still lateral violence, which means it's not based in fact. It's training, unfortunately, and we're going to look at that so you truly understand it by the end of this course. Now, why is this so prevalent in Indigenous communities? Why is it in every family, every home, every community? Well, truth be told, the more marginalized the group, the greater the chance of lateral violence. Marginalized, pushed off to the margins, oppressed, held down. The more oppressed or marginalized the group, the greater chance of lateral violence. I would go as far as saying in Canada, historically and in present time, no one has been marginalized more than Indigenous people. We have been oppressed for so long, we've internalized it, and a characteristic of internalized oppression is lateral violence. So as Indigenous people, what I'm saying is don't be surprised there's lateral violence in your community, in your home, or even in your office. We should be celebrating when there isn't, because we've all been trained to do this. The reality is Canadian history has resulted in a victim mentality for so many Indigenous people. Why bother trying? They're never going to let us do it. It's a learned helplessness and a learned judgment. No one judges Indigenous people more effectively than Indigenous people. And that's lateral violence. What I want to say to you this week, and if you remember nothing else, please remember this. Stay clear of they shouldn't do that. They have no right to say that to me. They don't have any right to treat me that way. That is that victim mentality, and you have no power when you're talking that way. You're now focusing on someone else's actions, and we know we don't control the actions of others. We're also sitting in judgment at that point, and that's another characteristic of internalized oppression. What we have to do is instead train ourselves to recognize lateral violence. When we hear anything that's discouraging us, we can go, oh, okay, this is history talking. I get this. It's not because this person is a horrible person. It's their training coming out. And we've all experienced that training. I have found that it helps tons to remember that lateral violence is often based in fear. When my mom asked me, do you really want to go to college? She was scared, one, that she wouldn't be able to protect me so far away at a college campus, and two, that she was going to lose me, either physically and I would never return home, or emotionally and intellectually because I was going to come home now educated and unable to communicate with her. Let's keep in mind, education has long been a divider for Indigenous people, so it's often a trigger for people. And when they get scared, they lash out. Now, the other one might be, rather than fear for you, that fear of losing you. Maybe your best friend doesn't want you to go to college because they have no idea what they're going to do in the community without you. Maybe your colleague doesn't want you to leave the office and go for that new job because they're scared stiff that they're going to have to pick up your workload. Fear is a natural human reaction. Unfortunately for us, it often manifests as lateral violence. Please remember, this is super, super common in Indigenous communities, in any marginalized group. We went through 7 generations of the residential schools in some families, 5, 6, and 7 generations. This is training that we have inherited over and over again. It's going to take a while to get past it, but every single person, like you, who becomes educated on lateral violence breaks the chain. And then you can move forward and make a difference for the people you work with and your own children and grandchildren one day. Canadian history taught us that it's safe not to try, that it's safe not to leave, that it's safer to not want more. That is so often at the base of lateral violence. We can't do that. They're going to put in some imaginary horrible thing. That's history speaking, in the form of lateral violence. Bottom line, some people are threatened when you try to move ahead. They're scared stiff of what it's going to do to you or to them, and they lash out because of it. The whole idea of this course, the whole idea of the work I do is we have to overcome this. Because this is not the oppression from outside. We are doing this to our own. And if you're taking this course, I'd be willing to bet you agree that this has to stop. Now, there is a solution, by the way. It's called Praxis. And it's just the process of observing what's going on, learning from it, and changing your behavior. It's exactly what I said earlier. When someone says to you, do you really think they're going to hire you for that job? Oh, okay. That's lateral violence. Okay. Yes, I do think they will. I'm incredibly qualified. Instead of getting upset, change your behavior. Recognize this is not a person attacking. Sadly, it's them sharing either their habits, their fears, or both with you in the form of lateral violence. We are going to talk about this in detail in this course because the one thing we can't keep doing is judging each other. And if you're judging people for using lateral violence, we're still judging our own, and we need to do something different. I want to remind you, take your time. You can watch the video on a Monday or whenever you receive it and think about it for a couple days. Re-watch it on Tuesday or Wednesday and do your homework when you've had the time to think about it. The time, that pondering time, is when it's truly going to sink in, and that's going to make a difference in your life, in the life of the people you assist, whether they're your clients or your children. All of the instructions, whether you're accessing this online or by USB, are provided to you every week. We've made this as simple as possible. Why? Because we want you to succeed. Because as Indigenous people, we deserve to succeed. Don't forget to do your homework. I'll see you next week. Love you. Bye-bye.